Welcome to Madani Shamsuddine's Critique. This is the second episode in our Plato series. In our previous lecture, we introduced Plato in his philosophical project. Today, we turn to one of the most provocative and enduring arguments in the history of literary theory, Plato's attack on poetry in Republic Book Acts. The title of this episode is The Imitator and the Truth. To understand the weight of what Plato is doing in Book Acts, we must first understand the cultural context. In ancient Greece, poetry was not entertainment in the way we think of it today. Homer was not simply a poet, he was considered a teacher, a moral authority, a source of civic wisdom. Poetry was understood to educate citizens, shape character, and transmit the values of the community across generations. Into this tradition, Socrates steps, and he does so with a radical claim. In the Republic, he argues that poetry, as commonly practiced, is philosophically indefensible. It must be expelled from the ideal state. His argument operates on three distinct levels. The first is ontological, it concerns the nature of reality. The second is epistemological, it concerns the nature of knowledge. And the third is psychological, it concerns the effects of poetry on the human soul. Let us examine each in turn. Plato's first argument begins with his theory of reality, what we call his theory of forms. For Plato, the world we see around us is not the ultimate reality. It is a world of appearances, representations, of imperfect copies. Behind every particular thing, every bed, every table, every act of courage, there exists a perfect, eternal form, the ideal archetype of which all particular things are merely shadows. Now, using the analogy of the bed, Plato identifies three levels of existence. At the highest level stands the form of the bed, created by God alone. This is the true bed, perfect, eternal, singular. Below it stands the particular bed, the physical object crafted by the carpenter. It is real and useful, but it is only an imperfect copy of the form. So we have the particular bed, and below stands the image of the bed, the painting of a bed, or the poet's description of one. This is not even a copy of the form, it is a copy of a copy, a shadow of a shadow. This is what Plato means when he says the poet is thrice removed from the king and from the truth. The poet does not represent reality, he represents the surface appearance of things that are themselves already imperfect. Imitation, by its very nature, cannot reach truth because it reproduces the appearances rather than essences. But Plato goes further. He argues that the poet does not merely fail to reach truth, he lacks even the knowledge necessary to recognize it. Here Plato introduces a crucial distinction between three figures: the user, the maker, and the imitator. Consider the flute. The user, the flute player, possesses genuine knowledge. He knows what excellence in a flute means because he experiences it directly in a performance. He knows what works and why. The maker, the flute maker, has craft knowledge. He produces the instrument based on the user's direction and correct opinion. He does not have the full theoretical knowledge of the user, but he has particular or practical skill grounded in reality. The imitator, the painter who paints a flute, or the poet who describes one, has neither. He reproduces only the visual surface of the thing, with no understanding of its purpose or excellence. Now apply this to the tragic poets. He writes of warfare, of statecrafts, of justice and courage, but has he governed a city? Has he led an army? Has he himself achieved the virtues he depicts? Socrates makes this challenge directly to Homer, the greatest poet of Greece. No city, he observes, was ever better governed because of Homer's counsel. No war was ever won by his strategy. The poet, Plato concludes, goes on imitating without knowing what makes a thing good or bad. His power is not the power of knowledge, it is the seductive power of meter, harmony, or rhythm, ornamental persuasion that conceals an absence of understanding. The third argument is perhaps the most powerful and the most disturbing. Even if we grant that poetry lacks truth and knowledge, one might still argue, what is the harm? Can poetry not still offer pleasure, catharsis, emotional release? Plato's answer is unequivocal: no, because the pleasure poetry offers is itself the danger. Plato argues that poetry does not address the rational part of the soul, the part capable of judgment, deliberation, and philosophical reflection. Instead, it nourishes what he calls the lachrymose and fitful temper, emotional, impulsive, irrational parts of us. And here he identifies a devastating paradox in theatrical experience. When we watch a hero weep extravagantly on a stage, when we watch a character abandon himself to grief, we do not judge him, we admire him, we are moved, we applaud. Yet, if that same man were sitting beside us in real life, abandoning himself to the same grief, we would consider it shameful. We would urge him to restrain, to be rational, to be a man. Why this contradiction? Because poetry, Plato argues, temporarily suspends rational self-governance under the cover of aesthetic pleasure, under the safety of fiction. It allows us to indulge passions that reason would ordinarily suppress. And uh, the danger, he warns, is not contained within the theta, pity and grief. Once nourished in fiction, carry over into real life. The emotional habits we cultivate while watching a play do not disappear when we leave the theater. Poetry does not merely reflect emotional excess. Uh, it cultivates it. It entrenches it. It trains us slowly to be ruled by passion rather than reason. Plato's threefold arguments culminates in the expulsion of the imitative poet from the ideal state, but, and this is crucial, he is careful to clarify that this is not an act of Philistinism. It is not the judgment of a man who hates beauty or has no feeling for art. Indeed, Plato confesses openly his own deep love of Homer. He calls him the first and greatest of the tragic poets. Yet love is not sufficient reason to tolerate philosophical error, and so the door is left open, but conditionally. Poetry may return. He says if she can prove her title, if she can make a reasoned philosophical defense of her value to the state. This concession is significant. It acknowledges that the quarrel between philosophy and poetry is not a simple matter of opposition. It is a matter of unresolved tension. And here we arrive at the deepest irony of the text, an irony that Aristotle would be the first to notice. The very dialogue in which poetry is condemned, the Republic itself, is a literary and dramatic work. It is filled with myth, metaphor, dialogue, and narrative. Plato, the philosopher who expels the poets, is himself one of the greatest prose artists in the history of Western literature. This is not a contradiction to be explained away, it is the fundamental paradox at the heart of the quarrel between philosophy and poetry, a paradox that has animated literary theory ever since. That brings us to the end of today's lecture. We have seen Plato constructs a three-part philosophical case against imitative poetry. It is ontologically removed from truth, epistemologically empty of genuine knowledge, and psychologically corrupting to the rational soul. And yet, as we have also seen, his condemnation is neither final nor simple. The quarrel between philosophy and poetry is, as Plato himself calls it, ancient, and it remains alive. In future episodes, we will turn to Aristotle's response, his Poetics, which can be read in part as a direct answer to this challenge. Thank you for watching Madani Shamsuddin's critique. If you found this lecture valuable, please like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more episodes on literary theory, criticism, and the philosophy of literature. Uh, until next time.